A crisp late-afternoon hush settled over Hollow Creek Road the moment the four-star general's Cadillac Escalade rolled to a stop. The engine's dying gasp echoed through the towering pines, their needles whispering in the wind. He sat for a heartbeat, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, then eased himself out into the cool shade. No cell signal, no passing cars, just the hiss of steam rising from a grateful radiator and the distant call of cedar waxwings. His uniform remained perfectly pressed, every crease sharp enough to catch the fading sunlight. 4 gleaming stars adorned each collar, that this was no ordinary motorist, yet he moved with the unhurried calm of a man accustomed to bearing weight far heavier than car trouble. He dipped his head to pop the hood, the polished brass of his badge, catching the last rays like a quiet salute. Before he could retrieve his toolkit from the passenger seat, crunching gravel announced another arrival. A sheriff's cruiser slid to a halt mere yards behind him, red and blue lights pulsing through the darkening canopy. The general straightened, hands unclasped behind his back posture, at as steady as the promise of dawn. In that electric moment, the air shifted opportunity for help, or something far less welcoming. He planted both feet firmly on the ground, the leather of his dress shoes scuffing the gravel, and turned to face the vehicle. No hurried scramble for paperwork, no raised voice, only a poised readiness that spoke of decades spent leading men in faraway deserts and distant hills. Under that polite calm lay a steel resolve. This roadside would bear silent witness to a clash between two kinds of authority, and neither man would step aside without revealing exactly what power in uniform is meant to protect and what it too often fears. The deputy emerged from his cruiser with the swagger of a man convinced of his own importance. He was of medium build, dressed in well-worn blue, and his hand hovered possessively over the grip of a Glock strapped to his hip. Without introduction or courtesy, he barked, "You stolen this vehicle into the settling dusk." The general, unruffled, folded his arms and replied with steady composure, "This is my car. I simply broke down." That answer earned him only a sneer. The deputy's lips curled as he strode forward, boots crunching the loose gravel. Hands on the hood now, he commanded his tone, leaving no room for debate. It was the kind of order usually reserved for someone at gunpoint, yet here stood a 4-star officer in full-dress uniform, his insignia gleaming, being treated like a common roadside criminal. Carefully, the general placed his hands palm down on the dusty hood, his posture unhurried and deliberate. He could feel the metal's cool resistance beneath his palms, as though the road itself was bearing witness. His voice, when he spoke again, was soft but carried unmistakable authority. "Sir, I'm a general of the United States Army. If you will, but I ask only once, verify my credentials before you presume a crime." The deputy's eyes flickered. Was it irritation or simple disbelief before he spat out, "Don't play rank games with me. Face down, spread your feet." The surrounding pines seemed to lean in the forest, holding its breath. In that charged silence, 2 worlds stood opposed, one rooted in rigid command, the other in disciplined restraint. The deputy's insistence on dominance masked a profound uncertainty, as though he feared the uniform he confronted more than the man wearing it. And as the general remained motionless, the night air grew thick with anticipation, bracing for the clash that was about to upend every assumption about power, respect, and the rule of law. The general bent forward as instructed, hands flat against the cold metal of his own hood. His posture was calm and deliberate, as though he were merely posing for a photograph rather than being treated like a common criminal. Without warning, the deputy rammed the end of his baton into the general's knee with fierce force. The loud crack of splintering wood echoed through the silent pines, and the 4-star badge slipped free from its clasp, spinning across the gravel, before coming to rest at the general's boot. A single bead of blood welled at the wound and dripped onto his polished trousers, yet he uttered no cry of pain. Each blow the deputy landed seemed less an act of law enforcement and more a declaration of contempt. His face twisted in a triumphant smirk, as if discovering that beneath the surface of rank and uniform lay only flesh and bone, equally vulnerable, equally dismissible. The general's quiet endurance only seemed to intensify the deputy's aggression, revealing a grim truth: the machinery of authority was all too ready to turn hostile the moment it faced a black man, even one of the highest military rank. Around them, the forest stood witness in grim stillness. No sirens blared, no reinforcements came. The deputy's baton rose and fell in swift, precise arcs, each strike reinforcing the same bitter lesson. In that moment, the law was not a shield, but a weapon wielded without pity. Even the general's steady breathing, a sign of his unwavering self-control, could not disarm the deputy's prejudice. And so beneath the gathering twilight, the harsh reality of bias in action played out in a cruel litany of blows, each one laying bare the worst impulses of a system that, when challenged, betrayed its own solemn oath to protect and serve. The deputy clicked the handcuffs shut around the general's wrists and allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. That'll teach him his place, he thought, the metal biting into respectful flesh as he gave the cuffs a final tug. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction at having subdued a man in such high rank. Every clink of steel on steel felt like proof that here at least he was the one who held power. But just a few winding miles down Forest Glen Road, something very different was unfolding. In the shadows of the pine stand, a convoy of dark armored vehicles sat idling on a sidetrack. Soldiers in combat kit checked their rifles, their faces set and focused. Special operations personnel huddled around radio sets waiting for confirmation of the alert they'd been tracking for the past hour. On each keypad, a red light blinked with patient insistence. Back at the stop, the deputy turned to secure the general's coat and gear, still pleased with himself. He didn't notice the distant whine of helicopter blades growing louder, nor did he hear the crackle of his own radio as backup units acknowledged the panic signal. He stood there lost in his victory, unaware that reunification was racing toward him at high speed. Inside the Escalade, the general wrapped a hand around the cuffs for a moment, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. He knew help was coming. He'd sent that single silent distress call the moment the baton struck. The woods around them, once still and oppressive, began to tremble with incoming rotor wash. Somewhere behind the trees, powerful engines revved and soldiers readied themselves. The deputy, still savoring his cruel triumph, finally glanced skyward. A sudden breeze lifted fallen leaves, and the distant thunder of choppers snapped him out of his satisfaction. His smug grin faltered as he realized that the moment of rescue was upon them, and that this roadside spectacle would soon fall under the scrutiny of forces far beyond his control. Less than 3 minutes later, the thunder of Black Hawk rotors cleaved through the tense stillness, shredding the deputy's smug confidence. 3 helicopters swept low over the treetops like avenging angels, their downwash flattening ferns and stirring leaves into a swirling vortex. No sooner had they settled into landing positions than a convoy of Humvees thundered onto the gravel engines, roaring their headlights, carving bright arcs through the dim forest light. The sudden arrival of fully armed soldiers turned the tables in an instant. The deputy and his partners froze, hands trembling as they fumbled with their sidearms, before instinctively dropping to their knees at the shouted command. In a matter of seconds, the Humvees formed a tight cordon around the roadblock, rifles trained but held respectfully at port arms. Officers who had moments earlier wielded batons and cuffs now bowed their heads in submission as ranks of uniformed soldiers moved through the perimeter with deliberate authority. Each stride reminded everyone present who truly governed these woods, a battalion in full combat. Kit helmets, gleaming gear secured their presence, an unambiguous declaration of federal power. Amid the rotor wash and clattering tracks, the general watched from the back of his Escalade, his composure unshaken as soldiers knelt to unlock his handcuffs and help him free his stiffened limbs. The forest air, once heavy with threat, now thrummed with the promise of order restored. The deputy, still kneeling, looked up in wide-eyed realization, the weight of his folly sinking in as he met the steely gazes of those who answered to a higher chain of command. In that moment, the true sovereign of these woods stood revealed, not a badge pinned to a battered uniform, but the disciplined might of an army sworn to protect every citizen regardless of rank or color. The general stepped down from the Escalade, his uniform still immaculate, as he straightened the fallen 4-star insignia on his chest. From the convoy of Humvees emerged a tall officer with a cybernetic hand, Colonel Spector, his presence rippling authority. He strode forward, voice echoing through the clearing. "Where is General Dalton?" The deputy stammered, caught between fear and disbelief. Before he could answer, Spector's mechanical fist connected with 2 sharp slaps across the deputy's cheek, each crack louder than the last. The slap wasn't violence for its own sake, but a stern rebuke. This was a man in full command of America's armed forces. The other officers, their faces ashen, realized at once the gravity of their mistake. They had manhandled a 4-star general. Without orders, each man reached for his own cuffs and locked them around his wrists, the metal clicking with reluctant acceptance. In that instant, submission was their only path to redemption. By restraining themselves, they acknowledged the hierarchy they had so brazenly tried to defy. Silence fell heavy with the understanding that justice and the chain of command must be honored, no matter what uniform one wears. Within the hour, the clearing became an impromptu press stage. Reporters craned their cameras, microphones thrust forward, while curious neighbors lined the tree line. Standing before the Humvees and his own battered Escalade, the general, 4 stars shining on his sleeve, addressed the crowd with the steady authority of a lifetime in uniform. His voice carried across the hush of the forest road. Today, we have borne witness to a grave injustice. A fellow citizen, decorated, law-abiding, and defenseless, was brutalized at gunpoint. His only crime was the color of his skin and a misfortune of mechanical failure. This cannot stand. He spoke calmly but firmly, recounting the deputy's unlawful orders, the baton strike that shattered protocol, and the cuffing that should never have happened. Each violation was named and laid bare before the assembly of journalists, first responders, and local families who had stepped from their Sunday yards to see their world transformed. With gentle urgency, he reminded everyone that every law enforcement oath demands protection of citizens, not intimidation. No badge, he intoned, grants the right to tear down the very rights it was sworn to defend. His words resonated beyond Forest Glen, echoing over TV broadcasts and radio waves carried on social media feeds and morning news bulletins. When he concluded, he invited questions. What reforms will we demand? How will we hold our guardians to account? The murmurs swelled into a chorus of resolve. Editors back in newsrooms typed his final line verbatim: "We must never forget our pledge to protect every citizen without exception." Minutes later, the hashtag Hollow Creek trended nationwide. From city halls to kitchen tables, Americans debated policy changes, body cam mandates, and community oversight. And in that moment, a remote back road in South Carolina became the unlikely birthplace of a movement, one born not of violence but of unwavering truth spoken in the face of power. Within hours of the roadside confrontation, the Department of Defense and the Pentagon issued uncompromising orders: secure all records, download every frame of video, and place the 4 officers involved on immediate suspension. In Washington, the Undersecretary of Defense summoned her top senior inspector to lead the inquiry, an experienced woman of impeccable reputation who had built her career rooting out misconduct in the ranks. Back in Forest Glen, the deputy received a formal notice report to the DoD Inspector General's office at once. Gone were the familiar trappings of the sheriff's badge. Now he entered a sterile office suite under bright, unforgiving lights. The inspector herself reviewed the evidence in real time, a detailed, unedited montage that showed the deputy's baton strike and the cuffing of a lawfully identified federal officer. Each clip played was accompanied by her calm narration. Here you struck him without cause. Here you ignored his credentials. Here you violated protocol. There was no malice in her tone, only the precision of decades spent ensuring that every service member, no matter how small their rank, answer to a higher standard. Across the country, the public release of these raw, unvarnished recordings sparked a powerful reaction. Churches held morning discussions. Neighborhood watch groups re-examined their own training. Senators on Capitol Hill arranged emergency hearings to consider new legislation mandating body-worn cameras and clear documented grounds for every detention. Editorial boards, long accustomed to calling for reform, found themselves echoing the inspector's verdict. No officer stands above the law. As the deputy sat before the inspector, awaiting the next step's possible charges, certainly career-ending discipline, it became clear that this was more than a local scandal. It was a watershed moment for American justice, born on a forgotten back road, but destined to reshape how every uniform, every badge, and every oath is honored, from sea to shining sea. News of the general's roadside rescue quickly morphed into a full-scale inquiry at Forest Glen Sheriff's Office. Investigators uncovered reports of deputies planting counterfeit narcotics, filing no-cause arrest warrants, and shredding citizen complaints. Even internal logs showed orders to hide disciplinary records and destroy body cam footage. The scandal's scope stunned local residents and state officials alike. In a televised address from Pentagon headquarters, the general laid out a bold reform agenda. Every traffic stop must be accompanied by a written report. Body-worn cameras are to record all interactions. Citizens must have easy access to file grievances and appeal any detention. and an independent review board will audit every use of force incident. Within days, grassroots groups held town meetings, editorial pages across the nation called for federal legislation, and members of Congress pledged hearings on policing standards. For the first time in decades, the promise of meaningful, transparent oversight felt within reach, a new era born from one man's unwavering resolve to demand justice for all. A few months later, startling revelations rocked Capitol Hill. Senator Celeste Dorian, once a vocal opponent of the general's promotion, was unmasked as the clandestine backer of a private security firm that had orchestrated the smear campaign. Investigators discovered a web of shell companies funneling money to local police associations in exchange for cleanup operations, planted evidence, suppressed complaints, and altered reports. The expose sent shockwaves through Washington. Dorian, flushed and defiant, faced calls for ethics hearings and possible expulsion from key committees. His office released a curt statement denying any wrongdoing, but the mounting proof, bank records, corporate charters, and whistleblower testimony was undeniable. He resigned from his leadership post rather than face the full brunt of public inquiry. Meanwhile, General Dalton, now lauded as a living emblem of justice, embarked on a national tour of police academies, community centers, and legislative chambers. Dressed in his dress blues and bearing the four-star insignia, he spoke plainly to audiences large and small. Power is not a shield. It is a sacred trust. Every day, each of us must choose whether to uphold the oath we've taken. He championed the creation of independent oversight panels with real authority to subpoena witnesses and review internal files. He urged Congress to pass the Accountability in Law Enforcement Act, mandating transparent recording of all stops and searches and strict penalties for those who abuse their positions. In quiet gatherings, church basements, senior centers, small-town libraries, citizens recounted their own encounters with law enforcement, newfound courage filling these shared stories. The general's message resonated far beyond military circles, a reminder that no uniform, no rank, and no title can place one above the law. As autumn leaves began to fall, the country felt a subtle but unmistakable shift. What started on a lonely back road had become a clarion call. Real justice demands vigilance, honesty, and the willingness to confront those who betray the public trust. And in that ongoing pursuit, General Dalton's journey was far from over, his mission now woven into the very fabric of American civic life. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. All characters and events are creations of the author and are not intended to reference or criticize any real person. It is designed to raise awareness of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, prejudice, and injustice. Please consider this before viewing.